Glenn Kirschner tweeted, Speaker Pelosi says she'd like to see Trump in prison, supportable given he committed both campaign finance and obstruction of justice crimes, but she doesn't support impeachment. Query, does she know something is coming as a result of the counterintelligence investigation? To which I immediately texted you and said, get me Glenn Kirschner. And what did you do?
I said, it's late. I'll do the best I can.
Well, good morning, Glenn Kirschner.
Good morning, Steph. How are you?
Good. I am such a fan of yours. You're so great on TV.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah, you make stuff so understandable for those of us. You guys have become the rock stars of this era because there's so much complicated legal stuff happening, right? But that was really that's exactly. And I wish I had time to ask Chairman Schiff that. But explain what you meant by that tweet about that. This is what I wonder from the story. I just said earlier, Glenn, the story about intelligence not briefing him on our Russian cyber attack because they're afraid that he would stop it or tell them. Wouldn't that say to you that they know or are afraid he's a Russian asset?
Yeah, we see how reckless Trump is out in the open. How is it that our intelligence community doesn't have him being 10 times more reckless as part of their counterintelligence investigation that, frankly, we still know very little about? So, like you, I just kind of stay up all night worrying about the future of our republic, and stuff occurs to me like, now, wait a minute. Nancy Pelosi, who is a very shrewd politician and who is ordinarily really responsive to her base, she is quoted as saying Trump ought to be imprisoned for what he did. As a former career prosecutor, I tend to agree with that. He committed all kinds of felony offenses.
Yeah.
So he should be held accountable. But of course, Speaker Pelosi doesn't have the means to put him in jail. What she does have the means to do is open an impeachment hearing and try to hold him accountable. So she says, 1, he ought to be in prison. 2, she has at least the ability to hold him accountable by opening impeachment hearings. And 3, she says, I ain't opening impeachment hearings. Something doesn't add up. One
Glenn,
1 ordinarily equals 2, right?
Yeah, Glenn, let me play this for you. We broke a little news here Friday with Chairman Schiff on the show. Just listen to this little, and I want to get your take, okay?
Sure.
Stephanie, if I can mention one last thing about this. When Donald Trump is voted out of office, the Justice Department is going to need to consider whether to prosecute the former president.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I do think one of the things that they will consider, it won't be binding, but they will consider is if he's had a trial and been acquitted in the Senate, that will be a factor I think they'll consider in deciding potentially against indictment. And so those that want to see the ultimate justice of a prosecution should also keep that in mind.
Glenn, dying to get your take on that.
I respect Adam Schiff. I don't necessarily agree with his rationale.
Mm-hmm.
So here's what I'll say. We all know that if you are impeached for a certain offense, let's say obstruction of justice, whether that impeachment is successful or not, whether it results in the Senate removing him from office or not, if he is impeached in the House, doesn't matter when it comes to prosecutors' ability to charge an impeached president with a criminal offense after he leaves office. Now, here's what I think Schiff was getting at. The folks at the Department of Justice will kind of look at it not as a matter of law, but as a matter of equity. And what I mean by that is they might say, the decision makers might say, well, look, he was impeached, he was removed, he's been punished enough. We now don't want to launch into a several-year-long criminal prosecution of Trump because he's already been punished by being impeached and removed.
Okay, Glenn, let me just ask you real, because everything you say is so. I just gotta. So that's what I wanted to ask you. So are you saying that him being exonerated by the Senate would make the DOJ less likely to want to prosecute? I thought what Schiff was saying there was it would weaken the case legally in a criminal court if he were exonerated by the Senate. I didn't understand that to necessarily be true. I mean, his lawyers can argue it, can't they? But
no, his lawyers can't argue it. Here's the thing. So it's not admissible evidence in a criminal trial that some administrative proceeding, let's call impeachment an administrative proceeding for a minute, because it's not a judicial proceeding, right? It's not in the courts. It's in the legislature. it's irrelevant to a jury, a criminal jury's determination that the same person had been exonerated in an administrative proceeding. And that happens, not in the setting of impeachment, but it happens not infrequently. And I don't want to go into the examples of it, but I would argue as a prosecutor, Judge, that's inadmissible evidence. The only admissible evidence before the jury comes from the mouths of the witnesses that we call at trial. It doesn't matter what happened in administrative proceedings. Now, here's another concern, though, as a prosecutor. Because an impeachment hearing and a removal trial would result in witnesses testifying, you would then have the same witnesses who would be called in a criminal trial, and they would be cross-examined and impeached based on the statements they made during the impeachment hearings and the removal hearings. So it complicates a prosecutor's ability to bring a criminal case when those same witnesses have already testified in other forums. I hope I'm explaining that, because it's kind of two different concepts there.
Oh, right. But, Glenn, so what did you mean then by your tweet about does Pelosi know something is coming as a result of the counterintelligence investigation that would make her have this position?
Here's what I meant, and I put query in front of it because I wasn't asserting this as a matter of fact. I'm trying to find a way to explain why Pelosi is doing the inexplicable, right? Yeah. She's not concluding that 1 and 1 equals 2. She's not being responsive to her base, because I can't speak for her base. But you know what? The people who are looking for some justice for what this criminal president and his criminal administration have done are getting pretty dang antsy.
Yep.
Because nothing's...
I can speak for her base. We want impeachment.
Yeah. Well, I mean, almost 70% of the Democratic Party is there. Most of our our presidential candidates are. Yep. We're getting to a number of the caucus. I mean, I am worried, Glenn, about it depressing our base.
Yeah, and Steph, when she says things like, listen, I'm not going to move toward impeachment unless there's consensus. But we all know the way you build consensus is by opening impeachment.
Put on the case.
Letting the public see.
Yeah.
So her arguments, shrewd as she is as a politician, don't make any sense, because she must know something we don't know. Here's what I meant by my tweet. Maybe she's stalling for time because maybe she certainly knows inside stuff, right? Stuff that you and I don't know, because we're on the outside. Maybe there's something coming as a result of the counterintelligence investigation that Congress has already gotten wind of, that they're like, you know what? What we have on the table now in the Mueller report is going to look like small potatoes based on what the counterintelligence investigation has uncovered about his Russian collusion.
I always try to squeeze classified information out of Chairman Schiff, but he's too
he's too wily.
He says that people ask him and they say blink if this, or and he said eventually I have to blink, so then they take that as a sign.
And there's also Southern District of New York, right? Something could come out of there.
It could, but that's still under Barr's thumb, Attorney General Barr's thumb. He's controlling all of those 14 referrals by Mueller to other U.S. attorneys' offices. So I'm not wildly optimistic that he's not, throwing some flies in that ointment as well.
Good point.
So what about Glenn? Your colleague Lawrence Tribe obviously talked about an off-ramp. Because, I pushed back on Chairman Schiff and just said, look, why are we prejudging what the outcome in the Senate is going to be? I understand that Mitch McConnell and company are complicit, but, Glenn, you look at the numbers now, which are already way worse than Nixon. Once what you and I both know is in the Mueller report, we put on the trial. I always say never underestimate the Republicans' cowardice, that if, he's going to go down and take the whole party with them. So A, don't prejudge it, but then B, what about Lawrence Tribe's off-ramp? That you can end with a sense of of the House resolution and don't go to the Senate.
I agree, and I try to retweet Lawrence's article early and often because I agree with it in the Washington Post. We, as a prosecutor, when I had enough evidence to proceed the trial, I never made the ultimate decision about whether to charge somebody or not based on the certainty that I would win a conviction. And when I was chief of homicide, I always told all of our homicide prosecutors, it's more important to try cases than to win cases. You have a responsibility to try people for crimes they committed. We have a responsibility to impeach this president, to open impeachment hearings for the offenses that we know he committed, courtesy of what we learned in the Mueller report. And the outcome is secondary as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah,
So
and
I think Lawrence Tribe's recommendation is a good one.
It's our moral and constitutional duty, I think. And, you know, Glenn, you've been so outspoken about it. Our friend Jill Wine-Banks obviously talks about the anniversary of the smoking gun today, tape in Watergate. She says, today I see the Mueller report as the smoking gun of Trumpgate. It proves obstruction of justice, calls for congressional action. I mean, you know, when legal minds like you and she and 1,000 of you of bipartisan stripes have said, you know, this is a roadmap for impeachment. It is a absolutely slam dunk, at least 10 instances of obstruction. I just, it feels more like a moral imperative, doesn't it?
And Steph, that's why I don't understand where Pelosi's head is at this moment. But, you know, here's what I'll say. I have a feeling there are, and don't take this as gospel, this is just my sense. I have a feeling there are probably more recorded conversations that were captured as a result of the counterintelligence investigation. Here's why I say that. We caught Mike Flynn, General Flynn. Now, in prosecution circles, when somebody is talking on a phone that they don't know is recorded and they're talking about doing crime, we call that talking dirty. Kind of like if you got an illegal gun in your car, you're riding dirty, right? We caught Flynn talking dirty on the phone to the Russians. And Flynn is somebody who actually is aware of counterintelligence operations. Trump's not aware if he's wearing shoes in the morning about counterintelligence operations. How is it that we were not surveilling Russian phones that caught Trump talking dirty? I can't fathom of a counterintelligence investigation that did not catch that kind of information and evidence. So maybe Pelosi is sitting back saying, you know what? There's so much more to come that's going to break bad for the president, that it's going to make his little dalliances into obstruction of justice look like small potatoes.
Wow.
That's the only
Glenn,
thing I can figure.
Yeah, okay.
Glenn,
real quick, these Manafort Hannity texts, I'm not a legal expert like you, but is that not the same thing? Like pardon, dangling, suborning, perjury, we're all on the same team, stand strong, like what?
Sure, yeah.
And then they're using stuff. He's feeding information to Hannity, who puts it on his show, and then they use that to go back to the judge and say, "Oh, well, look what this person's." What is this legally?
Yeah, he's recommending. You know, he's recommending to a witness that the witness stay strong and not cooperate.
Right.
That's dirty. It's unseemly. It's the opposite of what I hesitate to call Hannity a journalist. He's an entertainer. It's the opposite of what those kind of folks who pretend to be journalists and have some responsibility for objectivity should be doing. But is it criminal? I don't know. I would like to, in knee-jerk fashion, say yes. But listen, I can tell a defendant who's contemplating cooperating or contemplating going to trial. I should say, listen, I think for 100 reasons it's in your best interest, and maybe even my best interest, unless I'm a co-conspirator, for you to stay strong, roll the dice, maybe you get acquitted, maybe you get a pardon. That is ugly. I think it's a little bit of a stretch to say it's criminal.
Disappointing. I like my knee-jerkers. Art, I lied about last question. So Gerald Nadler obviously has been, rumored to be for impeachment, but he now says like he has what he needs from Hope Hicks, to go to court, right? I mean and I think Adam Schiff said yesterday, what was it we played, that what would get me to him to the point of impeachment is a court decisions the administration still refuses to comply, that then we're in a full-blown constitutional crisis. Is there some legal point that we're waiting for here?
Yeah. So Nadler was smart in that he developed a record that they can, with Hope Hicks' testimony, non-testimony, that he can take into court, and a judge in his or her sleep will be able to rule in favor of there being no privilege and will order Hope Hicks to testify. I'm confident of that. Just as Judge Mehta in D.C. has taken up the issue of House subpoenas for Trump's financials and basically, told Trump's lawyers, just go away because your arguments are stupid and I rule against you. Judge Ramos in New York did the same thing with Trump's financials with Deutsche Bank and Cap One. Now we're going to win the same argument on the Hope Hicks front. Okay. Here's my concern. When Felix Sater was supposed to testify, and I heard Nadler say, we're going to let him testify behind closed doors, this is what I have a problem with. It's the behind closed doors part. Felix Sater was Trump's proxy for the Moscow Trump Tower deal and was over there negotiating this dang thing at the very moment that Trump is in Republican debate saying, I have no business interests or aspirations in Moscow. In fact, Trump signed the letter of intent to build the Trump Tower in Moscow on October 28, 2015, the same date he stood up in a Republican debate. So why in the world do you let Sater testify behind closed doors?
I agree.
To get that out into the public.
Agreed. One last one. I keep lying, and I'm going way long with you. But speaking of Watergate, John Dean tweeted, Saturday Night Massacre took 4 months for an impeachment inquiry to start after that. That was 20 months after the arrest of the DNC burglars at the Watergate complex. This takes time. House is gathering info. Mueller report is not 90 days old. I am the Baruch assault of impeachment. I want it now, Daddy. But what do you make of John Dean's?
Yeah, he's right. These things take time, and you know what? We're not good at playing the waiting game in this day of social media telling us everything 3 seconds after it happens.
Right.
But let's also look back to Watergate. They filed Jaworski filed the subpoena for the tapes in April of 74. The Supreme Court decided it in July of 74. It took less than 4 months. I think once these matters move into court, they're going to be expedited. The judges are going to rule uniformly against the administration, and hopefully we're going to get some good court opinions that are going to sort of let the impeachment process move forward the way it should.
Schiff said calling an impeachment doesn't necessarily make it move faster. I've heard other legal experts that disagree. Are you a yay or nay?
I think it's helpful atmospherically, if not legally, because I think the stakes are higher for this administration, which has done nothing but obstruct. I think the stakes are much higher if they're obstructing an impeachment hearing than if they're just obstructing routine congressional oversight hearings.
Glenn, I was going to ask you to come back, but I've almost kept you until tomorrow now, so I'm going to let you go, and thank you so much.
Come back anytime.
Please.
Awesome.
Thank you, Glenn. Appreciate it. There he goes.